You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. In the previous episode, we peeled back the curtain of film and television to explore how intimate scenes are created and why intimacy coordinators have become an increasingly important part of modern productions. But as I was preparing for that interview, it struck me that the lessons from this profession extend far beyond Hollywood. Just think about it. Intimacy coordinators help people communicate openly, establish boundaries, reduce performance anxiety, build trust, and create intimate moments that feel authentic and emotionally connected. Those are all skills that could improve just about anyone's sex life. So what if we borrowed some of the same principles that actors use before filming an intimate scene? Could planning sex actually lead to more passion? Could talking more openly about boundaries and desires strengthen intimacy instead of diminishing it? And what can intimacy coordinators teach us about communication, curiosity, and creating great sexual experiences together? In today's episode, we're taking the lessons learned on movie sets and bringing them into the bedroom to build healthier, hotter, and more connected sex lives. I am joined once again by Laura Desiree, the creative director of Sanctum, a private members-only erotic society known for its immersive events that blend live performance, fantasy, intimacy, and consent-driven exploration. She is a Level 2 certified intimacy coordinator with years of experience in erotic media and sex-positive storytelling. Through her work with Sanctum, Laura curates experiences that are culturally relevant, artistically elevated, and rooted in clear boundaries, consent, and discretion. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss, and that's going to give you a lot of great tips for having hotter sex. Welcome back to the show, Laura.
Hi, thank you so much.
So most people probably think intimacy coordination only matters on movie sets, but the principles of this profession seem remarkably applicable to everyday relationships. So just broadly speaking, are there any lessons from your work that you think could benefit real-life couples? So in other words, if we started approaching sex the same way that you approach the filming of an intimate scene, how might that help lead to hotter and healthier encounters?
The biggest flag I could fly in the eureka moment I have had in the position and in the role and the responsibility of intimacy coordinator is the reality of urgency, and urgency being the death of agency within us as individuals entering a sensual encounter of any kind, an intimate encounter of any type. There's decisions to be made. And if we don't stop to feel them and make them with full consideration of what our body is telling us, we have the chance of running into some danger zones. So my number one most important rule is to take that pause before engagement of any kind. It can be a breath. It can be a day, whatever it needs to be to decide, do I want to be doing this? And of course, we can talk about what wanting to be doing this feels like. There's a wonderful somatic alarm system in our body that can tell us an absolute yes or a maybe not so yes, more of a no. And then, of course, the great affirmative hell no.
Yeah. So one of the things you do is really help people to be very attuned with their own bodies so that they can understand, is this actually a desire and something that I want to do? So being very in tune with yourself in that way, I think can be very beneficial because so many of us go into sex where there's this misalignment between our internal willingness and then what we agree to do sexually. And then that leads to a lot of potentially negative experiences in the bedroom. So one of the biggest myths about great sex is that it has to be completely spontaneous, that, if you talk about it beforehand, that you've somehow ruined the mood. Yet your entire profession is built around extensive conversations before anything physical even happens. So I think one of the most important lessons your work can teach us is that planned sex can actually lead to better sex. So based on your work, can you talk a little bit about how planning out the details of an intimate encounter can facilitate more passion and chemistry and spontaneity in the moment?
100%. I love this so much because people are also always asking me about foreplay and about dirty talk. These two ideas of how do I make it exciting before we actually get into it? How do I keep the interest there? And then when we're in the moment of it, or just seconds away from stepping into the bedroom, how do I keep that, water slide effect of, oh my God, this is so fun, so exciting, and I just want this ride to keep going. These are so easy to achieve when you've checked in with yourself first and you've said, okay, what do I want out of this encounter? What am I fantasizing about for this encounter? Even if it is your partner of the last 20, 30, 40 years, what do you get most excited about in the interaction that you may have with them? Based on the history you know of them or based on what you're enjoying about them so far. So I like to gather all of that. First and foremost, gather all of that. What are you in your fantasy brain thinking about with this person? And then, of course, they have their own fantasy brain too, right? They have their own idea of what they're looking forward to, and it might not match yours. So, of course, making room to ask them a little bit about what they're excited about and what they enjoy in the things you do together, yes, that's important. But when we're talking about being maybe the one that's, sharing the vocal enthusiasm and you want to lay some groundwork, I love framing it as, can I tell you what I want to do to you? Can I tell you what I'm most excited about doing? And that, of course, you're proposing your fantasy. It doesn't mean we're doing it. This is what I'm fantasizing about when I think of us. This is what I have been obsessed with in my mind today thinking. So what you're doing is you're making all of these proposals and you have to be ready for the potential rejection. That's a huge part of it. But that's a huge part of being a sexual responsible adult in today's landscape, regardless, is being open to the potential rejection of these things. But I think that's a great way of, sharing your enthusiasm, finding where the two or more of you might connect on that, and sort of stringing together what feels like a really exciting gameplay. And guess what? You're probably not going to get through all of it. And that's the best part, right? You roll some of those over into the next time.
Yeah. And it's also, you're not making assumptions about what the other person wants or just assuming that they like the same things that you do automatically. Because so many people go into sex with this approach of, sort of being a mind reader where they're just trying to guess what it is that the other person is into. And oftentimes when we guess, we're incorrect, right? So that's the other benefit, the value of really talking through this in advance is you can get on the same page about where there is overlap in your desires and what you want to explore together. And that creates these new opportunities for sex to really be customized to be exactly what everybody involved in that situation wants.
Yeah, you develop that playbook together. And that's like the most exciting thing. We think about how do we stop sex from being routine? How do we still keep adventure in our sex life? The more that you can talk upfront about, these desires or things that you are curious about and you want to experience with your partner or with, the person you're hoping to engage with, that just builds this wonderful playbook. And it's something that you grow confidence in.
And that playbook is something that can continue to grow and expand over time because something I found in my research is that people often develop different sexual fantasies over the course of their lives. Like what turned you on when you were in your early 20s might be very different from when you're in your 30s or your 40s or later. And so it needs to be, if you're in a long-term relationship, having this ongoing dialogue about what is it that really turns me on or gets me going now, because oftentimes couples will approach sex by just doing it the same way that they've always done it. And sometimes the old ways just don't work anymore because you or your partner have changed as sexual beings. So keeping this as an ongoing conversation where you're updating the playbook and adding new plays to it over time, I think can be a useful approach or framework for really keeping the spark alive in relationships.
I found that there's this enormous compulsion or interest to immediately look outward when we're in a long-term relationship, to look outward as to, should we open the relationship? Can we bring other people into it? Can I find new partners? Newness, novelty. And that's not necessarily the best path forward to building or reacquainting that satisfaction in your sexual life with your partner. It doesn't have to be that way. I think there's a lot of that in our culture right now. You see a lot of these articles about, open your relationship and Let's forget about monogamy, ethical non-monogamy. Of course, this might actually be the key to you feeling revitalized in your sex life. But I think instead of the automatic outward search, there needs to be the automatic inward search. And before you start introducing new permissions or desires to you and your partner, what if you were to inquire within, okay, so in my solo mind, what am I fantasizing about? What am I truly fantasizing about? What am I desiring? What am I wanting? And that's the first conversation. It's with yourself.
Also, that's where a lot of open relationships go wrong, is because a lot of people open up to save a failing relationship because they haven't invested and worked on recultivating that sexual dynamic together. And what I find in my research is that for the people who have the most successful open relationships, they're the ones who started from a place of strength, right? Where they already had a strong connection and really good and solid communication skills, and opening it up, they had the skills necessary to really navigate the situations and challenges there. Now, it's funny because when I mention this to people, they're like, well, if the relationship was already strong to begin with, why would they want to open it up? And it's like, well, different people want to open up for different reasons. And there can be various reasons why people might want to open their relationship. And it can bring a lot into a couple's life beyond just more sexual opportunities. People open up for all kinds of different reasons, but that's a whole separate podcast episode. But yeah, so I think, really working first on the relationship and what you want and reconnecting with your partner in that way is a really good place to start when you're in a long-term relationship context. Now, one of the core parts of your job is dealing with issues related to consent and communication. And I think we oftentimes oversimplify consent in our culture down to this simple yes, no question. But healthy intimacy is about so much more than just obtaining permission, right? We need ongoing communication, and we need to check in with each other and recognize that people's comfort levels and desires can evolve throughout an encounter. So what can people learn from the way intimacy coordinators approach consent and communication that could help them to build these healthier, more connected experiences?
First and foremost, I think there's an awareness that we need to have around some of the conditioning that goes into saying yes to, be it the requests, the routines, or the established norms within our sexual dynamics. Especially if you've been in a long-term relationship, there can be something of a conditioning that just says, this is what's expected of me or expected of us, the way we have sex, how often we have sex, what it looks like to be intimate, what the details of intimacy outside of the bedroom look like, the PDA. There can be so much of that we have just accepted as the way it is. So first and foremost, you need to begin to confront. I'm not even saying erase yet, because that can feel like a free fall. Well, if I erase it, then what grounds do I have to understand anything? So it's just being aware of where those presets live. And we oftentimes in intimacy coordination, in production, we enter a scene with those presets as well, when our scene partner might not know anything about what our experience in life has been. This is a major reality that we come with history, and we build a history in long-term relationships with people. So first and foremost, being aware of the routines and the conditioning that is set in place. That's something to just say, hey, I'm aware that I might feel that this is the way it has to be because it's the way it's always been. But then what I like to do is tell people to be very aware of the somatic experience in weighing options. And it can be in micro moments when someone says, I would like to have a shower immediately after being intimate. How does that feel for the partner? Do you feel a way about it at all? Do you feel shamed about it at all? Do you feel confused by that decision? We have all of these little micro moments in intimacy. And that wasn't even a great example, but we have all these micro moments in intimacy that might land with our partner in a strange way. So somatically, here's what I say. Go into your own body. When there's a decision to be made, and it could be, are we having sex with the lights on or the lights off? It could be that basic. What does it feel like in your body? You want to watch for those changes, those fluctuations. Of course, the excitement that we have about sexual engagement can feel a lot like stage fright. There's a little giddiness, but we know what it is. We know what it is. We know that there's a release coming, and we know that there's an end in sight that's going to feel good, right? Or at least we hope it does. But you want to watch for those extreme no's, and I'm talking shortness of breath, a dizzying feeling. Sometimes it really is a change in body temperature. This can be something That is the body's alarm saying, absolutely not. I don't want to do this. How am I going to endure this? You never want to be enduring any aspect of your sexual interaction with someone. It's not about overriding that alarm system so that you can just make the other person happy. Ultimately, what happens there is you will resent yourself, you'll resent the partnership, and then you end up destroying two relationships, not just the one with the person, but the one with yourself. And you don't want to live that way. It can be a very bad feedback loop that just intensifies over time. And unfortunately, it's a very major reality in our life, and the way that we don't stop to address how we might fluctuate within permissions and boundaries. So knowing your somatic self and that response system, at the very least, to be the representative and the authority that stops those no's before they happen, is the number one responsibility here. Because you'll never regret chasing a curiosity that maybe you had a little bit of stage fright about, but you were excited about. But if you feel that absolute no, you should not proceed.
Let me introduce you to Soaking Wet from VB Health. It's a doctor-formulated blend of 2 prebiotics and 3 probiotics that promote total vaginal health, as well as 3 vitamins and minerals that promote vaginal wetness and overall sexual health. VB Health is on a mission to create supplements that work using scientifically backed ingredients. They take quality seriously, with each batch produced and tested by 2 separate third-party labs for safety and effectiveness. They even share their third-party lab results publicly. VB Health is a physician-owned and woman-owned business that has happy customers across all 50 states and over 45 countries. VB Health also just dropped a new product that I'm excited about called Energy Boost. In fact, they have a whole range of supplements to support you both in and out of the bedroom. Make every encounter slipperier, sexier, and downright sensational. It's time to get soaking wet and keep the good times coming, literally. And the best part? Soaking Wet is formulated by doctors at VB Health, and it works. Visit soakingwet.com and use code Justin for 10% off, or click the link in the show notes.
So you mentioned stage fright, and that, kind of has me thinking about this broader theme of performance anxiety and how, that's something that can affect actors and performers, but it also affects real everyday people when they're in the bedroom, right? People are often worried about, how do they look? Am I pleasing my partner? Am I even doing sex right? Right? There are lots of things that might pop into people's minds during the moment that kind of like pull them out or get them stuck in their head. And I think your job really helps people to try and feel comfortable enough in their own body to be present so that they're not stuck in their heads. So are there any techniques that you find that are effective for kind of like reducing self-consciousness and helping people to stay engaged and in the moment? I mean, I know you've talked about this importance of somatics and paying attention to your body, but if somebody's not really used to paying attention to their bodily signals, like how do you just be more attuned with yourself and present and in the moment?
This is like my number one activity that I preach about. It came from years and years ago, another lifetime ago in teaching burlesque. So, that's an art form where it's all about confidence and it's all bodies. It's available to everyone to take your clothes off in an artful way in front of an audience. So how do you feel confident in that if it's not something that comes natural to you? One thing that I advise is this ritual of quite literally miming a shower. Okay, so you start, maybe you do just come out of the shower. It's alone. It's something you do in your alone time. You could do it with a lotion on your hands. You could do it with absolutely nothing. And all you're going to do is you're going to have a very intentional deep breath that settles and grounds yourself. And you're going to start with building a lather between your hands. It's a mythical lather because it's not really there. And then I ask you to smell that lather. What scent is that? It's something you like, something that makes you feel romantic, something that makes you feel spoiled and sophisticated. And then what we do quite literally is you're going to rub that mythical soap and lather all over the body. So often in sexual interactions, we focus on what society has told us to worry about. Penis size, breast size, ass measurements, genital presentation. We do so much focusing on that we forget about the beauty and the landscape of our entire selves. So you're pushing this soap all over yourself, right? And what you're doing is you're observing the feelings of all these erogenous zones of the body. And you're doing it slowly, ritualistically. You're doing it intentionally. And you're realizing how much pleasure the body can receive in all of its mass, not just in those areas that we direct people to worship and we direct people to, fawn over. What you're doing is you're activating the entire body as something that's worthy of pleasure. And it becomes this great way of inspiring creativity for conjuring pleasure with someone else, but also finding all of that delicious worthiness in yourself. So this is I would make it a daily practice if you're really trying to build up that confidence of pleasure and being quote unquote worthy of it in this lifetime, is starting by showing yourself that you are.
No, I love that exercise. I've not heard that one recommended before, but I'm going to have to try it. So, so even with careful planning, right, intimate scenes don't always unfold exactly as expected, right? Someone might realize they're uncomfortable with something, emotions unexpectedly pop up, or the scene simply just isn't working in the way that everybody envisioned. And the result is that sometimes an intimate scene needs to be filmed multiple times to get it just right. And that doesn't mean that anyone failed or that you need to call the whole thing off. And to me, that's a valuable lesson, especially when it comes to something like real life couples who are acting out their fantasies. Sometimes it takes a bit of practice to perfect it. So what can people learn from your work about treating sex as this ongoing process of exploration rather than just expecting everything to go perfectly the first time?
It's not going to go perfectly the first time.
Not.
It's going to feel scary. It's going to feel new. Developing that language and getting used to saying things to your partner, such as, I might need a moment to catch my breath, is so sexy and a great way of just informing them, hey, I want you to know, being the person I'm engaging with, that I might need to pause in moments. I might need to pause. And that's not because something is going wrong or we're failing or it needs to stop and I hate you and we can't get back to where we were. I'm just going to need a moment for myself within this. So I think setting that up earlier than in the moment, in the moment is where you can actually have that record scratch, and maybe it's not just finding the piece of dog hair in your mouth while you're kissing because, you share a bed with a giant golden retriever sometimes. It's being able to say up front, hey, so I might need a moment, or I might take a pause. Is that okay with you? I might catch my breath somewhere in this. I hope you don't mind. That kind of language that just sets up and establishes that there might be some speed bumps. Doesn't mean we're stopping the journey. It just means, hey, I might need a moment to kind of slow down, to collect, and informing your partner. Again, it's like something upfront. It's not saying, hey, at 7.5 minutes in, I will be stopping and I'm going to run to the bathroom and lock the door. No, it's just opening up the potential that we might take pauses in the interaction. It's so important.
Yeah, I think it's so important to normalize the pausing, and also important to normalize aftercare and talking about your experience afterwards, because sometimes you might find, well, hey, it didn't quite match up to exactly what we thought it was going to be, but that's okay, right? We can always try it again, right? And I think that's where a lot of situations go wrong with sexual fantasies, where people try it and they have this idea that they built up in their head for so many years. They think it's going to be great and amazing. And then they do it. And then it's awkward and weird and uncomfortable. For example, this is often the case with threesome fantasies. People will think the idea of having a threesome sounds amazing. And then they do it and they're like, I don't know what to do with whom and when. And how does this all work? And that doesn't mean that threesomes aren't for you or that you could never enjoy that experience. It's just that you might have to try it a couple of times to sort of get in the groove and figure things out in terms of how you communicate. A lot of people struggle to communicate with just one other partner, let alone two other partners, right? So I think with a lot of situations, it's just, let's normalize talking about it afterwards and talking about the tweaks or adjustments we might make the next time to see if we can make it an even better experience. So it all goes back to sexual communication as being this ongoing process where we're talking about it before, we're communicating it during, and then we're also discussing it afterwards as well.
So valuable. And be patient with yourself as you look for that language. Sometimes it's the first conversation we've hosted in such a vulnerable nature. And that can be something that comes with enormous intimidation. The idea of speaking about yourself and your feelings and what you're experiencing as you weigh these options, as you navigate new sexual terrain with your partner, you can feel enormously intimidated to stand alone in that. But that's the only way that you're going to see improvements in the connectivity that you have with them and in the confidence to pursue new and exciting frontiers sexually.
Hmm. So a lot of people have watched a movie or a TV show and thought, I want to recreate that scene with my partner, right? And that's something I found in my research on sexual fantasies is that a lot of people fantasize about recreating things they've seen on screen. So for example, some of the more common scenes that people mention include the upside down kiss in Spider-Man 1. There are people who mention scenes from The Notebook, like I think there's like a kissing in the rain kind of scene. Lots of kissing scenes people mention, but I've also had people mention movies like Titanic and like the erotic, like nude drawing. People also talk about the movie Secretary and some kink and BDSM scenes from there. Of course, I also hear a lot of 50 Shades of Grey. It really runs the gamut in terms of sex scenes, intimate scenes that people think, oh, that would be really hot to do in real life. But you've seen firsthand, like what goes into creating those intimate moments on screen. So what do you think people should know before they try to recreate their favorite sex scene?
When it comes to some more physical desires, an upside down kiss, you better have a weight bearing beam in your house if you're going to be hanging upside down on something. There's a lot of logistics that go into creating some of those fantastical moments on screen. First and foremost, I love that art influences us in this way, and I think it should. I think pulling from inspiration that we see in movies and wanting to experience that in our real life, that can be a beautiful thing. But there is an enormous amount of choreography that goes into creating that so it looks effortless, so it reads or feels or plays as entirely natural, because a lot of the times nothing about it is. Sometimes these actors have no idea who each other are. They did not anticipate the wardrobe to fit the way that it did. The footwear is not helping them walk with stride and confidence, or maybe the conditions of the room are just too cold to be actually naked in this scene, but they have to do it. So there's a lot of that sort of, I could break down the fantasy of it for you and let you know just how mechanical it can be. But I'm also very excited that our culture continues to draw from these inspirations. I think it's part of the purpose of art.
Yeah. It's funny. One of the people who mentioned that the upside down kiss was their fantasy, they said they actually tried it, but it felt just like a regular right side up kiss. And so, like on screen, it looked really hot, but then the reality of actually doing it, like, wasn't so hot. And so, I think that it's also important to kind of have that reality check of like things that can look really hot on screen don't necessarily translate the same way when we try them in reality.
Yeah, you might be able to hedge your bets slightly if you have the score of the movie that's playing in that moment while you're doing it. Like there's little things you might be able to tweak, but it's so true. It might be the underwhelming reality of the year,
Yeah. Yeah. And also, when it comes to things like kink activities, I often like to tell people, you might find what's in 50 Shades of Grey to be really hot, but that's also not a how-to guide for how to practice kink in your own life. And a lot of the things that you're not seeing in that movie or in the book series is, all of the extensive discussions that people might be having around their comfort zone and boundaries and all these other things. And there are lots of cases in a lot of these movies that have kink and BDSM scenes where there's some dubious content where it's, is that really consensual or isn't it? And so it's something where popular media, it's okay if you find it hot, and it's okay if you're like, oh, maybe I want to draw some real life inspiration from that. But also, before you actually try it in real life, consult an expert guide, written by somebody who knows what they're talking about, rather than, some fantastical depiction that's just designed to either sound good or look good on screen.
There's enormous responsibility in being a sexual adventure seeker, really just being a sexual adult today. There's enormous responsibility. And so, yeah, when it does come to some more intense forms of interaction like BDSM or whatnot, especially if you're a beginner, you cannot turn to a fictional film You cannot turn to a Christian gray for something that really is, can be very black and white. It needs to be a yes or a no in those situations. So yeah, I think that that's a very important message to include.
So you've spent years helping other people to create intimate moments that are safe, authentic, and connected. And I'm curious, has this work changed the way that you approach intimacy in your own life? So are there any lessons that you've learned professionally that have transformed the way that you think about sex or relationships personally?
Yeah, I've had to confront that really, really deep-seated yes inside of me. The one that feels it has to come out. And I know that we started the conversation mentioning this, but it's been a huge reality check for me that imprinted deep within me is this desire to people please. I think a lot of us have that. And so people pleasing can be its most dangerous when done in a sexual arena, because it attaches so deeply to how we see ourselves and the relationship that we have with ourselves. We are ultimately looking for ourself to govern for ourselves. And so when you let yourself down in those instances by overriding a no, it can stay with you and it can really unhinge how you feel about your life and being capable to, care for yourself and keep yourself safe. And that sounds very extreme, but it can be. And so this work has really built up an enormous preservation of those boundaries for myself to understand what it takes to navigate with true, authentic enthusiasm.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Laura. It was truly a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Thank you so much, Justin. You can find everything about me at thelauradesiree.com.
Great, and I'll be sure to include a link to that in the show notes. Thanks again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.